The biting wind whipped through Pine Grove Valley, carrying with it the ghosts of a legacy stolen and a mother's dying wish. I stood on the dilapidated porch of my childhood home, the splintered wood groaning beneath my weight, a physical echo of the burden in my heart. 15 years. 15 years I'd spent running from this place, running from the memory of loss and the weight of expectation. Now, the keys to the Johnson family farm felt like a brand in my palm, burning with a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "This is yours now," Mr. Cyrus rasped, his voice as weathered as the barn beside us. The old lawyer's eyes, magnified by thick lenses, held a sorrowful understanding. He thrust a heavy folder into my hands. "All 2,100 acres. Just like your mother wanted. Generations of history, right here." The cornfields, stretching as far as the eye could see, rippled in the wind, their stalks whispering a mournful song, a lament for a battle lost, and a challenge to avenge it. My throat tightened, the grief I'd been holding at bay threatening to drown me. Mom had poured her very lifeblood into this land, fighting tooth and nail to keep it afloat, while cancer gnawed away at her from the inside. I ran a trembling hand over the faded blue paint of the porch railing, a ritual she'd performed every spring, a stubborn act of defiance against the encroaching darkness. My phone buzzed, the insistent shrill of my work life intruding on my grief. Northeast Power Authority. My bosses weren't thrilled about my emergency family leave, but duty, even in grief, called. As a regional supervisor, I was responsible for keeping the lights on, even when my world had gone dark. I'd barely started unpacking when a sharp, imperious knock echoed through the farmhouse. A woman stood on the porch, her blonde hair sculpted into an unnervingly perfect wave, her smile as brittle as winter ice. Two men in polo shirts, each sporting the smug Meadowbrook Association logo, stood like silent sentinels behind her. "You must be Eleanor Johnson's son," she said, extending a manicured hand that felt more like a threat than a greeting. "I'm Karen Hawthorne, president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. We were so sorry to hear about your mother's passing." I took her hand, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. "Thanks. But what brings the HOA out here? Mom's farm isn't part of your development." Karen's smile sharpened, revealing the glint of teeth. "Well, that's actually why we're here. There are some covenant violations we need to discuss." "Covenant violations?" My blood ran cold. "This farm has been here since 1920. Your neighborhood has only been around for what? 10 years? 15, she corrected, her voice laced with condescension. "And while that may have been true once, your mother never officially contested our annexation of this property. According to county records filed 5 years ago, this land falls under our jurisdiction now." The words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach lurched, a cold dread spreading through my veins. "That's impossible." Karen produced an official-looking document, the paper crisp and accusing in her gloved hand. "These papers were filed while your mother was still the owner. As you can see, the Meadowbrook Association's boundaries were legally expanded to include this property." My eyes locked onto the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like Mom's, but a subtle discordance, a barely perceptible tremor in the strokes, set off alarm bells in my mind. "There must be some mistake," I stammered, my voice wavering. "My mother would never agree to this." Karen's smile didn't falter. Instead, it deepened a predatory curve that promised trouble. "Nevertheless," Karen continued, gesturing with a disdainful flick of her wrist toward the barn, "those farm vehicles violate our storage ordinances, and that fence needs to be brought up to code. We'll give you 30 days to address these issues before fines begin." As they walked back to their gleaming, obscenely large luxury SUV, I noticed something that made my blood boil: survey stakes with garish orange ribbons, hammered into the earth at the edge of our cornfield. They hadn't been there at Mom's funeral, just 3 days ago. That night, sleep was a distant memory. Mom's paperwork, a chaotic testament to a life hard-lived, was scattered across the kitchen table: tax forms, medical bills, and land deeds dating back to my great-grandfather. Something kept nagging at me, a persistent whisper of wrongness about Karen's documents. Why would Mom, who had fought so fiercely for every inch of this land, ever willingly sign it away? I pulled out the locked filing cabinet from Mom's office. The key had always hung on a chain around her neck, a constant reminder of secrets held and battles fought. The funeral director had returned it to me with her personal effects. Inside, hidden beneath faded photo albums capturing generations of Johnsons etched into the land, I found a leather-bound journal. "Keep Fighting" was scrawled across the cover in Mom's familiar, defiant hand. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were detailed accounts of her relentless battles with the HOA, petty harassment over her tractor being visible from the road, absurd complaints about the roosters crowing too early, thinly veiled threats about the height of our corn. But then came the truly disturbing entries, notes about land surveys mysteriously changing, property line markers moving overnight, and HOA members trespassing to take photos of fabricated violations. The final entry, dated just 3 months ago, when she was in the hospital for her last, agonizing round of chemo, made my breath catch in my throat. "They're taking advantage of my sickness," she'd written, her words laced with desperation. "I don't have the strength to fight them anymore. God forgive me for failing to protect what my father, and his father, built." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the ink. I kept reading, driven by a desperate need to understand. Mom had painstakingly collected evidence, photographs of the original boundary markers, meticulously copied real property lines, and even surreptitious recordings of conversations with HOA board members. She'd been building a case, a desperate bulwark against the encroaching tide. On the last page was a sticky note, its edges curling with age. A phone number, and a name, Juliana Winters, attorney. "Call when you're ready to fight back." Outside, a car crept past the house, its headlights extinguished, a silent predator stalking in the night. I peeked through the curtains and saw Karen Hawthorne, bathed in the ghostly glow of her phone screen, taking pictures of our property from the driver's seat of her sleek Mercedes. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I obsessed over Mom's documents, comparing her real signature on bank statements and personal letters to the forged monstrosity on Karen's annexation papers. They weren't the same. Not even close. By dawn, 3 cold, hard truths had solidified in my mind. The HOA had falsified documents. They had deliberately taken advantage of my mother's weakened state. And they had no idea who they were messing with. "This is criminal," Juliana Winters said, adjusting her glasses with a sharp click as she examined Mom's journal and the HOA documents, her gaze unwavering. Her office walls were lined with imposing law books and framed newspaper clippings, each a testament to battles won against ruthless corporate developers. "Those signatures don't match at all," I said, my voice tight with suppressed fury, pointing to the glaring discrepancies. "And look at the dates. This one is from when Mom was in the hospital. She couldn't even hold a pen that day." Juliana nodded grimly, her expression hardening. "The HOA has been systematically pushing boundaries, literally, for years. They've been planning a luxury development called Harvest Estates on your eastern fields. Your mother fought them at every turn. So what do we do?" I asked, desperate for a plan. "File criminal charges for fraud, and get a court order to stop any development," she said, her voice steely. "But I warn you, the Meadowbrook Association has deep pockets and connections at City Hall. Karen's husband, Victor, sits on the county zoning commission. This won't be easy." My phone buzzed the insistent tone of a work emergency. Power outage in Sector 7. As Northeast Power Supervisor, I couldn't ignore it. Duty again? "I need to handle this," I told Juliana, my frustration simmering. "But I want to move forward with everything you suggested. I'll prepare the paperwork," she promised, her hand resting briefly on my arm. "Meanwhile, document everything. And I mean everything." Driving home to change into my work clothes, I spotted Doug Walter, the HOA treasurer, hammering "No trespassing" signs along what used to be our property line. Only now, the signs were planted 50 feet into our cornfield, a blatant act of territorial aggression. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over. "What do you think you're doing, Doug?" Doug barely looked up, his face flushed with smug satisfaction. "Marking HOA property boundaries. There's a board meeting tonight about developing this section. This is Johnson land. It's been in my family for generations." He smirked, a cruel, knowing glint in his eyes. "Not according to county records. You might want to check the updated plat maps." My blood boiled, threatening to erupt. But I forced myself to remain calm, calculating. "Those documents are fraudulent, and you know it. Prove it," he challenged, his voice dripping with contempt. "Meanwhile, we break ground next week." After handling the power outage, I drove straight to the county records office. The clerk, Mrs. Kapoor, had been a close friend of Mom's. "I was wondering when you'd come by," she said, her eyes clouded with sorrow. "Strange things happened with your mother's property records last year." She pulled up the digital files on her computer. "See these lot boundaries? They changed 3 times in 6 months. Each time, more of your land became part of Meadowbrook. I tried calling your mother," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But she was so sick by then." "Who submitted these changes?" I asked, my voice strained. Mrs. Kapoor checked the logs, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "All filed by Victor Hawthorne, on behalf of the Zoning Commission. Karen's husband, of course. Can I get copies of everything? The original boundaries, and all these changes? Already made them for you," she said, handing me a USB drive. "Your mother helped my son get a scholarship to engineering school. I haven't forgotten that." That evening, an email from Karen landed in my inbox, the subject line screaming, "Official Notice of Community Development Plan." Attached was a PDF outlining Phase 1 of Harvest Estates, 60 luxury homes to be built on what they were now brazenly calling Meadowbrook East Expansion, my family's eastern cornfield. Construction would begin in just 5 days. I was about to call Juliana when my work laptop pinged with an alert. As part of my job at Northeast Power, I supervised the emergency protocols for the entire county grid. A system check was flagging potential issues with power capacity for new development in Sector 12, exactly where our farm was located. Opening the utility maps, I realized something that made my heart race. Any major development in this area would require my department's approval for power infrastructure. The existing grid couldn't handle 60 new homes without significant upgrades. And who had to sign off on those upgrades? Me. My phone rang, displaying Karen's number. "We need to discuss fence height regulations," she started, her voice saccharine sweet, without even a pretense of greeting. "And those unsightly farm vehicles visible from Meadowbrook Drive, actually." I cut her off, my voice cold and hard. "We need to discuss fraudulent land claims and forged signatures." A beat of silence. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her calculating mind. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I've seen the real property records, Karen. And Mom's journal, documenting every instance of HOA harassment while she was fighting cancer." Her tone shifted, the honeyed sweetness replaced by a razor-edged steel. "You know nothing about real estate law or development rights. That land is ours now. We're beginning construction next week. If you try to interfere, you'll be hearing from our attorneys." "Funny thing about new developments," I said calmly, my heart pounding a steady rhythm of defiance. "They need power infrastructure approval from Northeast Power Authority. Which is usually just a formality," she snapped. "Usually, yes. But not when the regional grid supervisor has concerns about capacity issues. Or when they discover evidence of fraud." Silence filled the line, thick and heavy with unspoken threats. "Who exactly do you work for?" Karen finally asked, her voice laced with venom. "Northeast Power. I oversee the entire county grid, including Meadowbrook." "You're bluffing," she said, but I heard the tremor of uncertainty in her voice. "The HOA meeting is tomorrow night, right? I'll see you there. Bring your husband. We have a lot to discuss. About property lines, forged signatures, and power requirements." I hung up before she could respond. Within minutes, my phone exploded with texts from unknown numbers, other HOA board members, I assumed. I ignored them all. Instead, I walked the boundaries of our farm as the sun set, touching the soil my ancestors had worked for generations. In the golden light, I could almost see Mom walking beside me, pointing out where she'd planted her first crop, where Dad had built the irrigation system before he died, and where my great-grandfather had first staked his claim to this land. "I won't let them take this from us," I whispered to the wind, the promise echoing in my soul. "I promise." Back at the house, I spread the property maps across the kitchen table, marking the true boundaries with the furious stroke of a red pen. Next to them, I placed the grid infrastructure plans, showing every power line, transformer, and substation in the county. The HOA had no idea what they were up against. They thought they were dealing with a city boy who'd abandoned his roots. They were wrong. They were dealing with Eleanor Johnson's son. And tomorrow, they'd learn exactly what that meant. The jarring roar of engines and the sickening crack of splintering would rip me from sleep before my alarm could even bleat. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. Throwing on some clothes, I raced to the window. A nightmare scene unfolded before my eyes. Yellow bulldozers, teeth bared and engines spewing diesel fumes, were mercilessly tearing down the ancient maple trees at the edge of my cornfield. 5 workers in fluorescent vests scurried around like malevolent gnomes, directed by Karen Hawthorne, who stood imperiously amid the chaos, her face alight with predatory glee. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sheriff Miller, my voice shaking with rage. "They're destroying my property!" I yelled, pulling on my boots. "I'll be there in 10 minutes," he promised, his voice gravelly with sleep. I burst out of the house, still in my pajamas and work boots, waving my arms frantically. "Stop! You can't do this!" My lungs burned, my heart threatening to explode as I watched another 100-year-old maple crash to the ground, its branches flailing in a final, desperate dance. Karen spotted me and her smile widened, a grotesque parody of friendliness. She wore a ridiculous pink suit with shiny gold buttons, looking utterly, offensively out of place next to the muddy, brutal machinery. "Good morning, neighbor," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Beautiful day to begin our new development, isn't it?" "This is my land," I said, struggling to keep my voice from cracking, feeling like I might physically shatter. "You have no right to be here." "We have every right," she said, tapping her clipboard with a manicured fingernail. "The Meadowbrook Association owns this parcel now." Just then, Sheriff Miller's car screeched to a halt, its lights flashing a desperate warning against the dawn. He stepped out, looking grim, his gray mustache twitching, as it always did when he was upset. "What's going on here?" he asked, adjusting his hat, his gaze sweeping over the scene of destruction. Karen thrust a thick folder into his hands. "We're beginning Phase 1 of Harvest Estates. All permits and paperwork are in order." Sheriff Miller opened the folder and began flipping through the pages, squinting at the fine print. I held my breath, every muscle in my body clenched, waiting for him to speak. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice slow and deliberate. "These permits are for Lot 156. According to county records, this is Lot 27, still registered to Johnson Family Farms." Karen's smile flickered, like a faulty light bulb, before snapping back into place, even wider and more menacing than before. "There's been a mix-up in the paperwork. Our development plans were approved months ago. Not for this exact spot," I interjected, my voice ringing with desperate hope. "This land has been in my family for generations." "Well," Karen said, crossing her arms, her eyes glittering with malice, "your mother signed it over to us. Perhaps you weren't aware." Just then, my work phone blared to life with its insistent, unmistakable emergency ringtone. I glanced at the screen. A power substation was down, affecting thousands of people. I had to take the call. Duty called once more. "I have to take this," I said to Sheriff Miller, my voice strained. "Please don't let them destroy anything else." He nodded grimly. "I'll make sure they stop until we sort this out." I walked away to handle the power emergency, the sounds of Karen's outraged protests echoing behind me. "This is outrageous. We have deadlines to meet." For 3 agonizing hours I wrestled with the substation problem, my mind torn between the immediate crisis and the devastation unfolding back at the farm. Being the regional grid supervisor meant I couldn't ignore emergencies, even when my world was crumbling around me. By the time I returned home, the workers and equipment were gone, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable devastation, fallen trees, torn up earth, the raw, bleeding wound of progress carved into the heart of my family's legacy. Sheriff Miller had made them stop, but not before they'd cleared nearly an acre of ancient woodland. My stomach churned, a nauseating mix of grief and rage. These were trees my great-grandfather had planted, trees that had stood as silent witnesses to generations of Johnsons living and dying on this land. I walked to the mailbox, praying for some good news from Juliana, some legal maneuver that could stop this madness. Instead, I found papers taped all over my barn and fence posts. Large, crude red letters screamed, "Cease and desist," across the top of each one. The paper claimed I was blocking necessary community improvements, and demanded I stop interfering with HOA business. They warned of massive fines and legal action if I didn't immediately cooperate. My hands shook as I dialed Juliana Winter's number, my voice tight with barely controlled fury. "They're trying to scare you," she said after I explained everything, her voice calm and reassuring. "Don't remove those notices yet. We need to document everything." That night, sleep again eluded me. I spread out all my mother's papers on the kitchen table, her old journals, farm records, and land maps. In one journal, from last year, she'd written, "Karen stopped by again about selling the east field. Told her no. Later found survey stakes at the property line. Something feels wrong." I opened my work laptop and pulled up the power grid maps for our county, a sprawling, intricate web of lines, transformers, and substations connecting every home, business, and street light. The Meadowbrook Association neighborhoods all fed from Substation 12, the one I had personally redesigned last year. My phone buzzed with a text from my old friend Olivia, who worked at the county clerk's office. "Found something weird in the land records. Can we meet tomorrow?" I stared at the message, then back at the power grid map. An idea, a desperate, dangerous idea, began to form in my mind. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, maybe it was time they learned who they were dealing with. Outside, thunder rumbled across the valley, and rain began to beat against the roof, a mournful counterpoint to the storm brewing within me. As the storm grew louder, I studied the emergency protocols for Substation 12, memorizing every switch, every breaker, and every point of potential leverage. Then I made a list of everyone who might help me fight back. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about justice for my mother, and about reclaiming what had been stolen. "Everyone, please take your seats. The monthly Meadowbrook Association meeting will now begin." The secretary's voice echoed through the packed community center, each word a nail hammered into the coffin of my patience. I stood in the back, watching Karen Hawthorne arrange her papers at the front table, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She hadn't noticed me yet. My palms were slick with sweat as I clutched my folder of evidence, a tangible representation of the truth I was about to unleash. Attorney Juliana Winters stood beside me, her presence a reassuring anchor in the storm. Mr. Cyrus, Mrs. Olson, and Mr. Diaz, three neighbors who had lived in Pine Grove Valley for over 60 years, their faces etched with the wisdom of the land, stood nearby, their support a silent promise. "First item on tonight's agenda," the secretary announced, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Updates on the Harvest Estates development." Karen stood up, her smug smile broadening, her bright red blazer a defiant splash of color in the drab room. "Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to report that, despite some minor setbacks, our luxury home project is moving forward. The Johnson property has been secured, and construction will resume next week." My blood turned to ice, hearing her lie so effortlessly, so brazenly. Several board members nodded approvingly, while homeowners whispered excitedly about the inevitable rise in their property values. "Now," Karen continued, her voice dripping with condescension, "we need to discuss enforcement actions against certain individuals interfering with community improvements. Excuse me," I called out, my voice cutting through the self-congratulatory murmur. I stepped forward, into the spotlight. "I'd like to address the board." Karen's smile froze, the color draining from her face as all eyes turned toward me. "This is a closed meeting, for members only." Juliana stepped forward, her voice sharp and authoritative. "As legal counsel for the Johnson family, my client has the right to speak regarding any claims about their property." A wave of whispers rippled through the room, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Karen gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Fine," she snapped, her eyes narrowed. "You have 2 minutes." I walked to the front, my legs feeling strangely numb, and connected my laptop to the projector. The image of my mother's smiling face filled the screen, a poignant reminder of what I was fighting for. "My name is Johnson," I said, my voice ringing with newfound resolve, "and I'm here to discuss how this HOA fraudulently claimed 2,100 acres of my family's farmland while my mother was dying of cancer." The room went silent, every breath held captive. The only sound was the hum of the projector, a mechanical heartbeat counting down the seconds. "That's a ridiculous accusation," Karen snapped, her voice brittle and high-pitched. "Your mother signed over the property rights voluntarily. Did she?" I said, my voice deceptively calm. I clicked to the next slide, revealing a signature page stark and damning against the white background. "This supposed land transfer has my mother's signature, dated July 17th of last year." I clicked to the next slide, revealing a copy of Mom's hospital records, a stark contrast to the pristine legal document. That same day, she was in the hospital, having emergency surgery. Physically impossible for her to sign anything. Gasps filled the room, a collective intake of disbelief and outrage. One board member, a gray-haired man named Tom, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in a frown. "Is this accurate, Karen?" Karen's face flushed crimson, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. "This is just a misunderstanding about dates. It's not just one date," I continued, pressing my advantage, showing slide after slide, each one a damning indictment. Here are 5 different agreements, supposedly signed by my mother, each one dated when hospital records show she was either in surgery, heavily medicated, or unconscious. Mrs. Olson, her face etched with concern, stood up from her seat, her voice trembling with indignation. I've known the Johnson family for 50 years. Their farm was here long before any of your fancy houses. That land rightfully belongs to them. Karen banged her gavel, the sharp sound a futile attempt to restore order. Order! This is getting out of hand. Juliana stepped forward, her voice sharp and authoritative. The Johnson family has filed official complaints with the county regarding fraudulent real estate practices and elder abuse. A criminal investigation is pending. Board members exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with dawning realization. Tom turned to Karen, his voice laced with suspicion. You assured us this property acquisition was completely legitimate. It was, Karen insisted, her voice growing shriller, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. We've invested hundreds of thousands in planning and permits. We can't stop now. I clicked on my final slide, a technical diagram of the county power grid, its intricate network of lines and substations shimmering with potential. There's another problem, I said, my voice resonating with quiet power. As Regional Grid Supervisor for Northeast Power Authority, I've reviewed your development plans. I pulled out my employee ID, its official seal glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, and placed it deliberately on the table. The proposed construction would dangerously overload Substation 12, creating significant fire hazards. Karen's husband, Doug, leaped to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You can't use your position to block this project. That's a conflict of interest. Actually, I replied calmly, my gaze unwavering. It's my legal obligation to reject unsafe infrastructure plans. Safety regulations require my department's approval before any new development can connect to the grid. I zoomed in on the diagram, highlighting the areas of critical overload. Your luxury homes would require triple the power capacity currently available. The necessary upgrades would take at least 18 months and cost millions, which neither the power company nor the county has budgeted for. The room erupted in chaos. Homeowners shouted questions, their voices laced with fear and anger. Board members huddled together, whispering urgently, their faces etched with panic. This is outrageous! Karen screamed over the noise, her voice shrill with desperation. You can't do this! I just did, I replied, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in my chest. Tom raised his hand, silencing the cacophony. I move that we pause all Harvest Estates activities until these serious allegations are resolved. I second that motion, said another board member quickly, his voice tight with anxiety. Karen looked like she might explode, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. You don't understand what's at stake here. We've made commitments to developers. As the board voted overwhelmingly to pause the project, I noticed Doug Hawthorne slip out his phone and make a quick call, his eyes burning with a cold, vengeful glare. After the meeting, Juliana squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with pride. That went better than expected. But this isn't over. Karen and Doug have connections. They'll fight back hard. Let them, I said, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. I have truth on my side. Outside in the parking lot, Mr. Cyrus approached me, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. Your mother would be proud. But watch yourself. The Hawthornes don't like losing. I nodded, my gaze following Karen and Doug as they huddled with 3 men in expensive suits across the lot. They all turned to stare at me, their eyes radiating a chilling promise of retribution. Driving home under a starlit sky, I felt a fragile flicker of hope. The farm lights twinkled in the distance, welcoming me home. Mom's favorite radio station played an old country song about standing your ground. The feeling of victory lasted until my headlights swept across my front yard. My breath caught in my throat, a vice tightening around my chest. Someone had spray-painted huge red letters across my barn. This isn't over. I parked the truck and slowly approached the house, my senses on high alert. I noticed that the front door was standing slightly ajar, a silent invitation to a nightmare. Inside, chaos reigned. Papers were scattered everywhere, Mom's journals, family photos, and farm records, all dumped onto the floor in a senseless act of desecration. On the kitchen table lay a single piece of paper with a typed message, its words a chilling whisper of malice. Everyone has secrets. Even your mother. Even you. My hand shook as I picked up the phone to call Sheriff Miller. The war for my mother's land had just gotten much more personal. I woke up shivering in total darkness, a primal fear gripping my heart. Flipping the light switch did nothing. The house remained shrouded in an oppressive blackness. Strange. Only my house had no power. Meadowbrook's fancy streetlights glowed brightly outside my window, mocking my helplessness. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of aggression. My phone lit up with a flurry of worried messages from old family friends. Emergency HOA meeting happened last night. Karen told everyone you're stealing electricity. They're coming for your land today. Be careful. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. I grabbed Mom's old flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a desperate plea, and checked the circuit breaker. Everything looked normal, which meant someone had deliberately cut my connection from the outside. I tried calling the power company, but the line was dead. No answer. The silence was deafening. Going somewhere important? Karen's voice, laced with triumph, made me jump. She stood at my fence line with Doug Walter and two men in suits I didn't recognize, their faces hard and unyielding. What did you do to my power? I demanded, my voice trembling with rage as I marched toward them. We've discovered illegal connections from our development to your property, she said loudly, her voice carrying across the fields as if performing for an audience. The power company is investigating. That's ridiculous. This farm has had legal power for 70 years. Karen's smile widened a cruel, predatory curve that sent a shiver down my spine. Not according to the emergency inspection we requested. But we're willing to resolve this issue, if you'll sign these new boundary agreements. I noticed people filming from their cars, their phones pointed at me like weapons. A local news van had parked down the road, its satellite dish reaching for the sky. They had planned this whole spectacle and orchestrated it with meticulous precision. Get off my property! I said through clenched teeth, struggling to control the fury that threatened to consume me. Actually, Doug said, unrolling a large map with a flourish, the paper crackling like a declaration of war. According to our latest survey, his finger traced a new boundary line, cutting right through my house, cleaving my home in two. I drove to work, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, desperate to fix the power issue myself, to reclaim some semblance of control. Only to find my office door locked, a stark symbol of my powerlessness. My boss, Bernard, waited in the hallway, looking uncomfortable, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and apprehension. I'm sorry, he said, handing me a manila envelope, the weight of it heavy in my hand. You're on administrative leave, pending an investigation into misuse of authority. What investigation? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Allegations that you've been manipulating power access to force the HOA to back down on legitimate land claims. He couldn't meet my eyes, his gaze shifting nervously to the floor. Victor Hawthorne brought the complaint to the board yesterday. My stomach dropped, a cold, sickening lurch. Victor Hawthorne, Karen's husband. He was on our board. Bernard nodded, his face drawn. Vice chairman. For 3 years now. I sat in my truck, my hands shaking with a cold, simmering rage. They had planned this attack perfectly, cut my power, damaged my reputation, and removed my ability to fight back through my job. The precision, the sheer ruthlessness of it, left me reeling. My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Is this the Johnson farm? A gruff voice asked on the other end of the line. Yes. Who's calling? Dave Miller with Channel 8 News. We received an anonymous tip about illegal utility connections at your property. Care to comment? Before I could answer, a cacophony of heavy engines shattered the air. Through my rearview mirror, I watched 3 bulldozers, emblazoned with the Harvest Estates logo, rumbling down my driveway, followed by a convoy of trucks carrying armed security guards. This was a full-scale invasion. I threw the truck into gear and raced home, the tires spitting gravel, skidding to a stop in front of the advancing bulldozers. Sheriff Adams pulled up moments later, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. You can't let them do this! I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. He handed me a document, the paper cold and accusing against my skin. New emergency court order. Judge Phillips signed it an hour ago. Judge Phillips. He's Karen's uncle. My hands are tied until your hearing next month, the sheriff said quietly, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. But between us, something stinks about all this. I watched helplessly as the security guards established a perimeter, their black uniforms and impassive faces a chilling symbol of the forces arrayed against me. The bulldozers revved their engines, their blades gleaming with predatory intent, and began clearing my western field, tearing apart the earth with brutal efficiency. News cameras captured everything from the road, broadcasting my humiliation to the world. That evening, defeated and broken, I retreated to Mom's old storm cellar, the one place where I could find some measure of peace, some respite from the onslaught. The one place where I could think without being watched, without being judged. I felt utterly, completely beaten. As I stared at her neatly organized rows of preserves and emergency supplies, I couldn't help but wonder, what would you do, Mom? What would you do in my place? My fingers traced the rough, worn wooden shelves she'd built decades ago, each plank a testament to her resilience and her unwavering determination. Behind a loose board, hidden from view, I noticed something metallic glinting in the dim light. Pulling harder, I discovered a hidden compartment, a secret savior I'd never known existed. Inside lay a rusted metal box I'd never seen before. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside lay yellowed papers, brittle with age, original land grants, surveys from the 1800s, photographs of my grandfather with county officials, their faces etched with the pride of ownership. But one document made my heart leap with a surge of adrenaline, a spark of renewed hope: the original power grid agreements from 1952, when my grandfather had granted easements for the first rural electrification project. I scanned the faded text with Mom's flashlight, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the beam steady until I found it, a clause circled in faded red ink, its words a thunderbolt of revelation. In perpetuity, the Johnson family retains override authority for any utility modifications affecting their granted easements. The power. I was always been there. I just hadn't known how to wield it. Beneath these historical documents lay another treasure, a leather-bound journal, Mom's familiar handwriting filling its pages with detailed accounts of HOA harassment, copies of threatening letters, and most importantly, meticulously recorded conversations stored on tiny flash drives. I grabbed one and plugged it into the laptop she'd stored beside it. Always have a backup plan, she'd written on the final page, her words echoing in my mind. And remember who owns the power lines that run through our land. A loud crash overhead made me jump, the sound echoing ominously in the confined space. Through the cell's tiny window, I saw security guards searching my house, their silhouettes menacing against the twilight sky. They were tearing apart my life, piece by piece, trying to break me. I clutched the documents to my chest, a fierce protectiveness rising within me. Suddenly, I understood. Mom had been preparing me for this, arming me with the truth, and giving me the tools I needed to fight back. The HOA thought they had all the power, thought they could crush me beneath their weight. But they had no idea what I held in my hands. They had no idea what I was capable of. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile spread across my face.